and turning now to transgenderism. While the number of teens in the U.S. turning to gender transition surgery or drugs grows, there's also now a growing number of people who've waded those waters and come out on the other side with regrets. Earlier today, I spoke with Jay Ritchards, Senior Research Fellow at the Heritage Foundation, for his perspective on that. Jay Ritchards, welcome to our show. Thanks so much for joining us.
It's great to be with you.
Now, a growing number of people who've received cross-sex hormones or surgeries and are speaking out publicly saying that they regret their decision. What do you make of this phenomenon?
Well, I think what we're seeing is the bitter fruits of a social contagion in which kids pick up this idea that they might be the opposite sex, either from social media or unfortunately from their schools. And so we have this massive increase of young kids, minors, convinced of this idea. And so they start so-called gender-affirming care, as you said, with cross-sex hormones, sometimes puberty blockers, and then surgery, only to realize later it was a terrible mistake. And so this is a growing group of young people called detransitioners, and some of them are amazingly articulate. And honestly, I think many of us that have followed this for years thought this is probably where this is going to end up, and I think that's just the moment where we are in this debate.
Detransitioners talk about the complications that they've faced, including irreversible changes to their bodies. Many say that they weren't properly informed about the risks or other issues, such as infertility. So who's to blame here, do you think?
Well, I would say, look, sometimes doctors, I think, for the most part, that are engaged in this actually think they're doing the right thing. Nevertheless, they have the professional and moral responsibility to actually assess the evidence. Anyone with basic statistics could look at the lack of evidence for the benefits of this treatment. They could look at what the UK has just done in reversing course. And so honestly, I think ultimately it's going to be the doctors and the pediatric gender clinics that are on the front lines that we expect to look at the science that are not doing that are going to ultimately be held responsible.
What effect do you think detransitioners talking about their struggles on social media could have on the youth?
I honestly think that this will be the deciding factor. I mean, it's really sad that those of us following this from a policy perspective needed victims actually to be able to talk about this, but it was really sort of abstract until you have actual people, actually boys and girls, young men and young women with names and faces and stories talking about this. They've been already very important in hearings in state venues that are considering these things, and they play a major role in social media because for good or ill, it's the social media platforms where most kids initially get these ideas. And so I'm hopeful that social media can also be the source where many of them first hear the other side.
And the long-term effects of certain cross-sex procedures are still unknown. For example, some studies suggest that puberty blockers are not reversible. And more broadly speaking, it's still unclear based on the current research if these procedures are actually beneficial for patients. Yet this affirmative approach to gender dysphoria seems to be the most widely accepted, while other methods are shunned and considered politically incorrect. What's your take on that?
Yeah, that's exactly what's happening.